Hello again, artist friends, and welcome back to my channel. This video is all about getting started with gouache. I ordered the HIMI 48 color set, which comes with a couple of brushes, a nice white plastic palette that fits in neatly inside, and a little color chart with all the colors. I also decided to order the extra pack of brushes, which are pink, and not my favorite color, but it's what it was. And there's another 7 or 8 brushes there that are different sizes and shapes. So after peeling off all the lids, here's what you get. You have this wonderful little box of gouache. So I had this lighthouse image that I found in Unsplash a while back, and was something I really, really wanted to paint. So I thought, well, let's try the gouache out with that. So I want to start with the sky. So I mixed some of the blues to see what kind of blues I have. Now I'm using an 8x8 inch gummed pad of, I believe this is hot press watercolor paper. So it's the smoother paper, which I find works a little bit better with gouache than the textured paper. You can get much smoother blends. So I'm just mixing colors. Now, for those of you who haven't used gouache or thinking about using gouache, this is something that I'm still working with because I haven't been painting with it too long, is getting the consistency, because having done a lot of watercolor, you always want to add a lot of water. But with gouache, you want to add just enough water to get the paint to really paint well. So it's more like acrylic in that way, but the feel is different than acrylic. It's a much more kind of silky, smooth kind of painting experience. So for me, this painting was a lot about just getting used to painting with gouache and the consistency and mixing colors and, getting those nice flat areas of color. Gouache is, it dries flat color. So unlike acrylic, which generally has a little bit of a shine to it. So it's really different, even though it paints very similar in kind of how the final look is. The other thing I liked about it is that I found, and you'll see as I get further into the painting, that I can go over areas. Because it's, water-based and water-soluble, these are not the acrylic-based gouache. They do have acrylic-based gouache as well, but this is the water-based gouache. You can reactivate some of that color. So it's a little bit easier to go back and fix things or change things later. Having watched, other artists do videos and do a little research on it, I believe that you're supposed to start more with your darker colors and then paint over your lighter colors. So that was another thing I had to get used to, because I was used to painting light to dark like you would paint in watercolor. And you'll see here I switch because I just realized that, I probably should be painting my darker colors first. So I started with the orange, but then it's like, let's put in the darker colors. Because it's opaque, I can paint over, and I should be able to paint lighter colors over darker colors. So that's a little bit of a mind shift for those of you who paint in watercolor. It's, taking some adjustments, thinking about this kind of the other way around, and painting your darker colors and your darker shadow areas first. So even though I started with the sky, again, that's something I would do in watercolor. I would start with the sky. I probably didn't have to. I probably could have just dived right in and done some of those darker areas. So here I'm just getting the dark areas in the vegetation, that sort of big row of vegetation that run alongside the little lighthouse there. And I'm just playing with some of the colors in the palette to see what colors I like. And you'll see when I get to the final version, the colors are a little bit different. I'm trying to paint this, fairly close to the photo, just to see if I can match colors. But I'm not, as always, when we paint things from a reference photo that's not ours, we don't have to paint things exactly as they are. So we have some leeway to make adjustments as we see fit. But what I really liked about this photo was the brightness of the light and dark, that really bright light shining on the cliffs and making them that really red color and the nice bright lighthouse that stands out against the sky. So I'm trying to keep that in mind, that I want to keep that really, really pretty sense of color, but also that brightness of the light, that it's a nice sunny day. So I'm just starting to work on the rock area and put in I'm trying to put in some of the darker areas, or where I see shadows in between those crevices. As it kind of falls off the front there, there's sort of a cliff face on there. And again, I'm constantly reminding myself to go to the dark colors first, because I just have a natural tendency, having painted watercolor for so long, to want to start with the lighter colors. And you'll see on my palette, I'm just kind of letting things mix and letting all those colors mingle. One of the other things, if you haven't used gouache before, about gouache is that it dries really, really quickly. And that took a little bit of getting used to as well. You know, acrylic paint does dry fairly quickly as well, but not as fast as gouache dries. And I don't know if that's just the nature because it's an opaque flat medium, or, you know, because the water evaporates out of it faster, like it kind of does in watercolor. And so that pigment then gets set faster. It was quite a challenge in the first couple of paintings that I did to get used to the fact that that dries really quickly. And you have to keep kind of loading up your brush with paint and adding like little dips of water into it so that it's paintable. So here I'm trying to add some of that brighter red color now of the rocks. The other thing about gouache is that you use a lot of white paint. So because you generally end up mixing it just about in everything, and especially to make, you know, really light colors or add highlights, you use a lot of white gouache. So I actually bought 2 extra tubes of gouache that I use to fill in the white little spaces of gouache I have in this palette, because I go through it so fast. So now I'm just adding some of that color in, that really bright sort of red rock color in there. I'm painting around the vegetation areas. I'm just focusing on getting the rocks in while I have those colors on my palette. And I think the video is about 3x, so this is about 3 times faster than I was actually painting. I was painting fairly quickly, just because of the nature of gouache, and you have to kind of paint quickly in order to kind of get stuff on there. But it's interesting to watch it really fast. It comes to life a little bit quicker than when you're painting it real time. It seems like it's taking forever sometimes. And it's just a lot of color mixing and adding little bits of white or little bits of dark to make, you know, that transition shade just a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. So here it jumped ahead a little bit. So I've put in some of those darks. I'm starting to think about adding in the vegetation areas now. So I'm mixing up some greens. And I'm starting with the darker color, what I see in those shadow areas of the green. There's also a little roadway back there that leads up to the lighthouse. So I'm trying to make sure that I leave a little path for being able to put that in later. I'm also trying not to be super detailed with the vegetation. I want to make sure that it looks like vegetation and I have the values right, a light area, dark area, because the sun is hitting the top of it, which does give a really nice sort of bright green. But I'm just putting in the base shadow under layers right now, which is the darker green, the darkest colors I see. And then I'll come back in and you'll see now I'm adding yellow. I'll come back in and add the brighter colors on top. One of the things I discovered in doing that, where you have to paint light colors over dark colors, is you do need to let it sit and dry just a little bit. If it's not dry enough, the colors tend to just kind of mix together and it becomes a little mushy. Fortunately, gouache does dry fairly quickly, so I could actually paint fairly quickly even over the top. And then as far as the HIMI gouache goes, I've only tried the Holbein gouache. It was the only other gouache that I've tried at this point in time. But I really liked it. I mean, the downside with having it in those little cups is that unless you're very disciplined about cleaning out your brush or pulling paint in with a palette knife, they do get a tendency to get dirty, like contaminated. That's the only complaint I had with the way they were set up. So you end up washing your brush out a lot, or you have to get a bunch of little palette knives or something. I actually use wooden coffee stir sticks and just pull, sometimes just pull stuff out so that I don't contaminate the other ones. But it's really hard when you're painting and kind of in the moment to not want to just dip your brush in there and grab another color. So they did get contaminated over time, and you just have to do the best you can to clean them out. So now I grabbed the little detail brush. This is like got a really, really small tip. It's a small round. And I'm just putting in a little bit of detail along that back vegetation area. Now I'm to the point where I'm starting to add a little bit of detail and clarify some of the highlights and shadows in the rocks that are showing and in the vegetation areas. All those little crevices and dark areas where the rocks are split. These little brushes, the other thing I'll have to say is the brushes they sent with the paints were actually great size-wise. They were all fairly small brushes, but with gouache you don't paint large paintings. Just because of the nature of the paint, it's really hard to paint large areas at a time because of how quickly it dries. So most people that paint gouache are really only doing small paintings. So the brushes were all fairly small, but they were all really easy to work with. I found the points on them not too stiff where they weren't workable, but they weren't as soft as watercolor brushes. They're really, much like acrylic brushes. And they were really great. They held their points and they were really easy to paint with, I thought. So I think they did a good job with the brushes that they put in the sets. And after I finished putting in the rest of the rock area to the right there, now I'm back to the vegetation. That's had a little bit of time to dry. So I'm just pumping up the bright colors on the top there where the sun is going to be hitting it. So you see how bright that is over the tops of those dark colors. And this is what I love about gouache, is that I can paint that color over there and it stays that color. With watercolor, because it's transparent, you wouldn't even see that. I mean, you can kind of do that with acrylic, but it just, I don't know, gouache is just different. I just really, really like it. So I'm going to probably be spending a little more time doing some gouache paintings. And I'm going to fast forward ahead here a little bit. You'll see some jumps because this painting probably took me about 2.5 to 3 hours from start to finish. I may have taken a break in here somewhere. I think I took a break after I finished the vegetation before I started the little lighthouse here. What I found most challenging, especially with the lighthouse here, was getting flat colors. Not mixing the colors themselves, but painting it on in a way that it was a very flat color, because the side of that building is all the same color in shadow. So the gray had to be the same gray, like all the way along there. And it's really hard with gouache, or at least it is for me, because I've, haven't been painting with it too long, to keep that consistency so that that color stays very consistent and flat throughout that whole area. So that's something I'm going to be working on with my paintings with gouache. Doing the roof. So I decided I wanted to go darker red with the roof. It is actually fairly red in the picture, but the initial color I put on was too orangey. So I wanted to darken it up. So I'm painting around the top part there and those little extra, what look like chimneys. Trying to make sure I get my roof straight, which again was great with these tiny little brushes that they sent. It was really pretty easy to get really small, thin lines. And then I just decided to pull a little bit of that red down into the rocks just to kind of mirror that color in another part of the painting. Deepening up the shadows a little bit. I'm trying to make that effect of the sunlight and shadow just a little bit stronger. So I'm increasing the contrast of the shadows so that the light seems even lighter. And it really feels like a bright, bright sort of sunny day. I think I've been avoiding the top of the lighthouse, so I've kind of been fiddling around with other parts of it, sort of cleaning up some edges and lightening up some of the lights, because I know the top part is going to be challenging with the amount of detail that's there. But I've kind of finally reached that point where I've got to address it. So I'm going to just put in the basic sections of the lighthouse and try not to do so much of the detail. I think if you look at the photo, there's a flag and there's a bunch of detail there, and I'm going to try to just keep it much simpler. I'm trying to blend the grays a little bit on that part there because that's a round section. And I'm finding it challenging to create that sense of roundness. Like the blends don't seem to be cooperating. And then I realized I forgot to put the sky through my lighthouse at the top. So now I'm just trying to, again, fix that round part. I let it dry a little bit so that I could paint over it without it getting super mushy. And getting that shadow on the left and making it a smooth transition as it comes around that round section was a little bit time consuming for me because I wanted to make sure that it looked right. And there was a little window there. The nice thing about painting small is it's really easy to turn your canvas or paper or whatever you're painting on around so that you can paint in a direction that's easy for you. I found it really easy to come back and fix things. If I put in something that was too dark, I could come back and paint over it. If it wasn't perfectly straight, I could just grab the color again and just kind of straighten it up. Like here, I put in some little lines of that dark gray. But now I'm just using this little flat brush to kind of distribute that so it's not as streaky. I probably ended up mucking with this shadow part like way too long. But in the end, I mean, it came out okay. I probably just spent way too much time on it. Sometimes we get sort of fixated on things and it's hard to move on. All right, so there was a jump. I finally must have taken a break and decided I had to tackle the very top of the lighthouse with all that detail. I also, looks like I dropped in a little bit of a fence line there at the bottom of the lighthouse. There is a little white picket fence that's in there. And so here I just, again, it just jumped forward because I obviously got the rest of that in, and now I'm just doing some detail, adding highlight on that front side there where the sun is coming from. It's not perfectly symmetrical. When I got finished and looked at it, I did see that the railing was off a little bit, but, it's only an 8x8, so it was really small and a little bit hard to paint that tiny. Same thing with this. I'm putting in this little fence, but I'm not used to painting this small. These are, quite challenging for me because I'm not used to painting this small necessarily. But it was good. I think it turned out well, and I really liked painting small, so I'm clearly doing more. I've already done, I think, like 3 other 8x8s and probably like 6 small 5x7s, which are all landscape-based gouache paintings. And they were fun. I enjoyed them. I do really like gouache. I do recommend it especially for maybe if you're a watercolor artist and you're struggling a little bit, with watercolor. It is a challenging medium. Gouache may be something that is an alternative that works better for you, because you can paint it like watercolor. You can water it down and use it more transparently, but it does give you that flexibility then to also do things opaquely and sort of correct mistakes much easier. So I would just, suggest anybody who maybe is struggling with watercolor and, not sure if it's a medium for them, to maybe try gouache, especially if they don't like the acrylic paint, because it's a little bit more permanent and, it's a little bit more, I don't know if it's more toxic or not, but, obviously it has more plastic based stuff in it. So gouache might be a good alternative. Cleans up a little bit easier. And I think I'm pretty close to finished at this point in time. I'm just adding some finishing touches on, adding some detail, coming back and creating some brighter areas of highlight, pulling in a little bit more of that sort of red color to really make those that red rock color pop. And now I'm pulling in some of that really bright orange on those, again, on those rocks on the tops of where the sun is hitting. There's a really dark shadow area there just below the cliff too. I think I put in a little bit of grass there. Yeah. Okay, final touches are done. So I'm gonna leave it there. And here's the final version.